As an anime fan, I find myself enjoying the medium from different genres, and there are some times when you just find your sweet spot for a particular type of anime. Case in point, Black Clover. The Shonen Jump flavor of anime has always been my favorite, so when I was looking for a My Hero Academia replacement to fill the show hole during its hiatus this year, Black Clover was there to fill the void. And then I found out that there was a fan war between My Hero Academia and Black Clover fans? Look people, I'm not about that life. This episode is gonna get real serious, so let's spare ourselves the flame wars, okay? As I've been watching Black Clover, I see the many themes and ideals that the show conveys through its characters and stories that could very easily become episodes of Guidance Guy. And if you see that too, let me know in the comments while you like and subscribe and ring the bell. You know, the YouTube thing. But there was one observation that I noticed while watching the Elf saga that really made me think about this group a little bit differently. The fact that their story has a lot of similarities to the history of Africa leading up to and during the slave trade. Yeah, didn't see that coming, huh? Now I will say this from the jump. I'm not saying that everything that happened to a fictitious race in a fantasy anime story is a 100% one-for-one parallel to what happened to real human beings, including some things that are so disgusting and inhumane I can't say them on YouTube. That would be dumb, and speaking as a black man, if I heard someone try to make such a comparison on a YouTube video, that would piss me off. But what I am saying is that as I watched the Elf saga, I saw myself change my perspective of the elves as, okay, these are the bad guys trying to do a bad, to, wait a minute, there's more to this. Even Black Clover's creator, Yuki Tabata, has said in interviews that the elves are not bad people at their core. They're not some mustache-twirling Saturday morning cartoon villain that's evil for the sake of being evil. They're more complex than that. And for those of you who have seen the whole Elf saga, you know what I mean. What we end up seeing from the elves' point of view is a race of people that lived in peace, away from the rest of the world, were introduced to outsiders that promised them peace and prosperity, only to be deceived, abused, and decimated. Yeah, that sounds familiar. And in my research for this video, I tried to find out if there was such a connection that was supposed to be inferred by Tabata in Black Clover, but I couldn't find anything that indicated this. But if you guys know of anything that he said that reflects that, go ahead and put that in the comments for all of us to see. And in the light of the Black Lives Matter movement and the worldwide conversation going on to improve the lives of those of African descent everywhere in the world, we've seen a lot of changes. Statues of slave owners and national traders have been removed, and especially in America, we're starting to look at the parts of the tradition of the American experience and ask if some of these aspects have any part of a country that's supposed to stand for liberty and justice for all. And as important as those actions are, what we can't forget is that part of the goal to destroy racism and white supremacy is not just about getting rid of its symbols, but eliminating the symbolism behind the symbols. There's a mindset, a mentality, an ideology that produces these symbols, and that's what needs to be the real target. And today, we're going to explore how a similar ideology destroyed the elf people, how they responded to it, and how we can learn from their journey. I'm the Guidance Guy, and I hope you'll join me in this discussion. And as always, be careful of them spoilers, as this video will cover events of the Elf saga in Black Clover. And before we move on, I do want to say this. In this video, I'm going to be going after ideals and mindsets, not specific people or groups of people. I will be talking about a time of history that makes people upset and some people can get defensive about it, but I'm saying from the jump right now, I'm not saying any of this to attack any particular group of people at all. I'm just stating facts of history and explaining the motivations behind them. Like I said, our goal should be attacking mindsets, not people. And that's what I want to see in the comment section. I want to see us discussing ideas, going after ideas, and doing so in a civil way. There's enough divisiveness on the internet as it is, and I want to make sure that this space right here is for the opposite of that. I want to bring understanding, not more division. Like I said, I'll be making some similarities between the situation of the elf race and that of Africans in both the pre-colonial and colonial eras. These comparisons are going to be general because, you know, Africa's a continent, not a country. Africa is home of 54 countries, 3,000 tribes, and over 2,000 languages. That represents a myriad of cultures and peoples, and it would be foolish to reduce them all to one massive glob and call it Africa, which is something that people in the West tend to do. So let's keep that in mind as we continue. The Elf tribe lived in the Forsaken realm of the Clover Kingdom, which is the furthest away from the hub of the kingdom, the Noble Realm. In fact, they lived so far away that by the time they met the first Wizard King, he was the first human that they'd ever met. In a similar way, Africa at the time of colonial exploration was very far from Europe, at least relative to the means of transportation available at the time. The Elf tribe is also collectivistic. They live as though the entire tribe is a family, constantly looking out for each other and thinking in terms of the best interests of the tribe as a whole. We also see that the majority of African cultures are also collectivistic and celebrate the importance of group harmony and cooperation. As humans came into contact with the elves, they quickly saw that the elves had an abundance of magic residing within them. Though in the universe of Black Clover, humans also have access to magic, elves have a natural affinity to mana, or as they would say, they are highly favored by mana. Meanwhile, in the real world, Africa has a great amount of resources that are vital to the world, such as oil and precious metals, as well as luxury items such as gold and diamonds. When colonizers came to Africa, it didn't take them long to see the richness of the continent, especially when compared to the lack of these resources in the countries that they came from. And in both situations, we see both Africans and the elves have their resources taken from them by force. Near the end of the Elf Saga, we discover that the royals of old used magic technology to strip the elves of their magic and give it to themselves. And history, both past and present, tells us that the African continent has been exploited for its oil, stones, and minerals in order to enrich the colonizers of the past and the corporations and countries of today. The Clover Kingdom children are told the story of the elves, however, it's given a very slanted view. They're told that the elves are pure evil, that they had their eye on world domination and were only stopped by the first Wizard King, which, as we discover through the story arc, is not the truth at all. We find out that the elves were not invaders wanting to plunge the world into darkness, they were victims of genocide perpetrated by an evil class of people who envied their power. And when we look into the history of various Western countries, you don't have to look for long in order to find how they described those of African descent. You'll find words like savages, primitive, and simple. Even today, you could find articles calling Africa a quote, hopeless continent, and that how, despite the fact that African countries have been making strides to get themselves out of the mess that Western countries put them in, some still want to perpetuate the narrative that Africa can't do anything without someone else's help. Now again, these similarities are not to be some "this thing is 100% like this other thing" type of comparison. These are just observations that we're basing our conversation on. Because if this were a true one-for-one comparison, we would need to talk about how when an elf goes crazy and goes to full evil mode, their skin darkens. Because there's nothing wrong with having a whole race of light-skinned people whose skin goes darker only when they become completely enraged, irrational beasts of pure instinct. Yeah, there's nothing problematic about that at all. But we can look at some of the events portrayed in Black Clover and see that there's a kind of familiarity with real-life events. And now that we've seen these familiarities, let's take a look at the mentality that has changed history both in Black Clover and in real life. When wanting to make a change in the continuing civil rights movement for Black people or any marginalized group, you want to make sure that you're attacking the mentality that has produced the images, policies, and actions that impact them. We're going to take some time describing that mentality as it was utilized by both real-world explorers and the royal class of Black Clover. I will be using the term colonizer mentality to describe this mindset. The main aspects that we'll be discussing are the theft of resources, the death and scattering of indigenous people, and an ingrained sense of superiority. Of course, there's more to the colonizer mentality than these three components, but these will be our guiding points for this video. Let's start with the theft of resources. Throughout the history of colonization, we see this tactic used over and over again. Whether it's cotton in India or gold, oil, and human beings in Africa, the colonizers of the past went to the so-called New World with the express purpose of increasing the wealth of themselves and their country of origin. And let's not fall for the trap of thinking that all this is just in the past and this is just hundreds of years ago and it doesn't matter. Even today, countries like China are making deals with African countries to help them build infrastructure for them at the risk of these countries amassing tremendous debt. Taking advantage of a people for their own ends? Same game, different name. It becomes ironic when you see that Africa, a continent so rich in resources, is also so poor in places. How is that so? Well, that's what happens when through deception and force, what's yours is no longer yours. And in Black Clover, we see the same theft happen on the day that changed the elf tribe forever, the wedding of Licht and Tatia. By using a magic tool, the royals stripped the elves of the only thing that the royals saw in the elves, their immense amount of mana. The royals, who already have more mana than the average human, sought even more power when they realized that there was someone out there that had more mana than them. They never once saw the elves as members of the Clover Kingdom worthy of protection. All they saw was power for the taking. Also during the wedding, we see another aspect of the colonizer mentality, the death or scattering of indigenous people. In the history of colonization, we've seen both of this at play. Africans were dispersed throughout the world during the slave trade, leaving their homeland to a place they've never been to, with people speaking a language they didn't speak, and seen not as people, but subhuman property. The Native Americans were also uprooted from their tribal homes that they've had for generations in order to make room for a new country that saw their very existence as a hindrance, with some of these tribes being forced to travel halfway across the country to start over, while others were civilized in the ways of their oppressors. And then there's the treatment of the Australian Aborigines for almost 100 years, in which they were killed in such a brutal and thoughtless way, it can't be described as anything else other than a genocide. In the colonizer mentality, the indigenous people are uncivilized at best and inhuman at worst, and the royals in Black Clover had the exact same mindset. No one was spared in this red wedding. Men, women, and children were all slaughtered in this power grab. They were simply a means to an end. And over time, through wars between elves and humans, the elves were completely eliminated. And while looking at both our own history and those in the works of fiction like Black Clover, you might ask yourself, why would anyone do such a thing like this? How can you do these things and call yourself human? Now that's where the third part of our puzzle comes in, an ingrained sense of superiority. One of the major themes in Black Clover is elitism and the discrimination and prejudice that it creates in a society. Everything from every person who's ever mocked Asta for being magicless to the royals who treat the common subjects with contempt, we see a world in which magic has created a hierarchy in which magic equals power and status. And more often than not, those with more magic have a tendency to abuse that power for their own selfish ends. And we see this elitist way of thinking on full display as the royals take a magic tool, one that Lumiere wanted to use to bring equality to all people, and pervert it into a device that takes away magic, use it to steal the magic from the elves, and then murder them. The only way that a group of people can excuse genocide is by thinking, we deserve this more than you because of who we are. The royals already had more than enough mana, otherwise they wouldn't be the royals, but wanted to ensure that no one could ever challenge their rule. The royals always saw themselves as better than everyone else, and while a precious few used their advantage for the greater good, we see that the large majority of them exploited their station in life. And again, we see the same "we're better because of who we are" worldview during the time of colonization. After all, it was the colonizers that invented the concept of race in the first place. Because race is not a real thing, it's a social construct. People, this isn't Star Trek. It's not like we've made contact with other forms of life in other galaxies. The idea that human beings have differences in things like, I don't know, intelligence or criminality based solely on your melanin levels is dumb and shouldn't be taken seriously. In fact, the reason the construct of race was created in the first place was to justify the brutalization of African and indigenous people. It was created to set up a power structure in which white people were at the top and everyone else was under them. It gave white people permission to enslave and tear apart other people's families because they weren't fully human and they weren't on the same level as white people, and that they were no better than, say, a pet or a cow that you use for milk and beef. And with that mentality, this idea of we're better than you because of our skin tone, you can justify a multitude of injustices, which the colonizers did, and the Europeans at the time used everything from fake science to misinterpreted and out of context Bible passages to explain away their hatred. This tenet of colonizer mentality, an ingrained sense of superiority, is the foundation of which everything else is built on. Murder isn't murder if you don't believe the victim is human. Enslavement can be seen as doing someone a favor, and genocide as the only way to get rid of a group of people that just aren't on your level. And it's that mentality that not only brought about the extinction of the Elves and Black Clover, but also the unbalanced ethnic power dynamic that we see in our world today. But that isn't the end of the story, because in time the Elves got the chance to set the record straight, to come back from nothing and make a statement to the people of the Clover Kingdom. Unfortunately, that statement only worked to continue the cycle of pain and suffering that they were put into. Now that we've seen how the mindset behind the actions of the royals and the colonizers have created their respective messes in their worlds, let's take a look at how the elves reacted to the devastation that was brought upon them. Through magic, because that's how these things work, one of the elves from that fateful day, Patry, finds his soul survived the ordeal but did not cross over. What happened next was that he ended up sharing a body with one of the present-day Magic Knights, William Vengeance. As William would lead his top-ranked Magic Knight squad, the Golden Dawn, Patry would lead the terrorist group, the Eye of the Midnight Sun. It's kind of like Yugi and the Pharaoh in Yu-Gi-Oh! Except instead of both parties trying to save the world, there's one that's trying to protect the world, while the other is actively trying to destroy it using the same body. Now Patry, as the leader of the Eye, had one true mission, one that went beyond his stated mission to find the magic stones for unknown reasons. He wanted the magic stones in order to resurrect his elven brethren so they could destroy the royals and take down the Clover Kingdom. In other words, he wanted to pull a Killmonger and get massive revenge. And I'm not gonna lie, it's at this point in Black Clover that I started to see the elves as sympathetic figures as opposed to basic villains. Here you have a group of people who were snuffed out of existence due to no fault of their own by greedy people who wanted their power, and now they want to enact retribution on those who caused their demise. Yeah, I get that, as I've seen people like George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and Tamir Rice have their lives taken from them by either cops who abuse their power or wannabe cops. There's a part of me that wants to set the record straight. Not just for the unjust killings of those people, but for the unjust treatment of black people all over the world for the last 400 years. Seeing case after case where dirty cops get essentially paid vacation while they're investigated, only to have their case dropped for going to trial or having them be acquitted when it goes to trial, it drains you. It makes you question if justice is possible in such a broken system. And the desire for justice, for things that were made wrong to be made right, that's normal, that's human. But we must make a difference between justice and revenge. A difference that Patry and the resurrected elves didn't make. By the time Patry and the elves have returned to Earth in their borrowed bodies, the people responsible for their demise had been dead and gone for centuries. Now, are the royals of today responsible for their destruction? No. But are they benefiting from it? Yes. Their OP mana levels are a direct result of their ancestors' theft being passed down through generations. Kinda sounds like real life, doesn't it? Even though no one alive today is directly responsible for slavery or apartheid, many people do benefit from policies that gave their parents or grandparents a leg up decades ago. Now, does that mean those people are automatically evil racists? No, because as we've established, it's the mentality that should be the target, not the spoils of it. And this is the problem with the elves' revenge plan. Sure, there are a number of royals who we could say deserve to be taken out by the elves because they inherited their superiority complex from their families, but what about Leopold? Or Noel? Or Mimosa? Come on, you can't hate Mimosa! It's the same thing today. It can be easy or tempting for me to look at a random white person and go, "You're the problem, you're what's wrong with the world," without knowing where they're coming from. Not every white person is a racist. Now, are there some who are? Yeah, but you can't lump them all together, because that's what the elves did. They looked at all humans, not just the royals, but every single human in the Clover Kingdom and saw them as unworthy of life based solely on their association of being human. This is how the Elves went from being sympathetic victims to becoming unrelenting villains, consumed by their pain, betrayal, and hatred. And whether you're a minority or a white person that wants to be an ally, we can't react that way either. Seeing injustice should make you angry and upset. It should make you want to do something and change that situation and make sure no one else has to go through that experience. So how do we do that? We do that by seeking not revenge, but reconciliation. Like I said at the beginning, we've seen some great changes in the last few months on the front of ethnic reconciliation. Some of it has been great, to seeing monuments to hatred being torn down and people having honest conversations about the issue. And other things have been getting rid of Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben? Listen, real change doesn't happen because someone passed the right kind of law or got rid of the wrong breakfast mascot. It's when minds and attitudes are changed, and that's at the core of reconciliation. Reconciliation. It sounds nice, right? The idea of mending an open wound in our society that has been woefully ignored for too long and has become disgustingly infected due to our neglect? It sounds like a fantasy at times, but we must strive for that goal, and it starts at the individual level. In fact, you know who understands this ideal better than anyone in Black Clover? Who else but Asta? Yes, he can be simple-minded, easily excitable, and an overall goofball, but he has been the poster child of reconciliation in the show. Through his words, he vows to change the uneven system of the Clover Kingdom when he becomes the Wizard King, but he does it every day with his actions. He tries to meet people where they are. He tries to understand people and their motives, even as they try to kill him. And it's through that gutsy brand of empathy that Asta is able to change the minds of those around him. It's why Leopold sees him as a rival instead of dismissing him like so many others do. It's how he's earned the respect of his enemies. Shoot, it's how he won over the super tsundere herself, Noelle, to go from openly loathing him to secretly falling for him. And in our own way, we could use that same approach to reach reconciliation in our own lives. Actively trying to understand people instead of making judgments. Trying to see their point of view over instantly labeling them. For example, if you're a member of a minority group, be patient with white people when they're willing to listen, and don't be afraid to set boundaries for conversations. Not every topic needs to be had in one sitting, and sometimes having those conversations, especially if they involve your own experience, it takes a lot out of you, and you shouldn't feel the need to give a piece of yourself that you're not ready to share just because somebody asks. Know your limits beforehand. And for our white allies, do the same, and don't get stuck in the white guilt trap. If you feel guilty because of the advantages you've been given based on sins you yourself didn't commit, that's okay. But that needs to be followed up with actions to make amends. Otherwise, you're simply feeling bad in order to make yourself feel good. And I know that on the internet, bump the internet, our world right now thrives on this us versus them, good guy versus bad guy dynamic. And that's why we don't understand each other. But my hope is that on this channel, we can have these conversations without the spin, without the noise. Be sure to have that respect as you engage in the comments, and may we all strive for equality, liberty, and justice for all. Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments what other characters and franchises you'd like me to discuss next. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you know when the next video is ready. Until next time.